Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing today? I've been told that this is a lectern, not a podium. So welcome to my lectern. I'm Tim Carey, and I'm very excited to be speaking to you from my studio here in South Pasadena, California, also known as the Vitreonics headquarters, as you can see here. So my goal today is to inspire you to think in a new way about a very old artistic medium. We all know that the material of glass has been around for thousands of years, and that people have been creating art with it since it was first discovered, hence the term glass art. I know that for me personally, if you would have asked me, say 20 years ago, what comes to mind when you hear the term glass art, images like this would have popped into my head. This is Dale Chihuly, Paul Stankard, and of course Murano glass. I don't bring this up to discount these works. They're all very beautiful and masterfully created. But 20 years ago, I was a painter. I had no use for glass, and I was totally ignorant about what it could do. Now, I'm still a painter today, but instead of using traditional mediums like oil, watercolor, and acrylic, I paint with glass. Okay, so let's dive in. My story begins in 1997 here in Pasadena at the Art Center College of Design. I came here to school to hopefully study illustration and become a commercial artist. It was actually a very exciting time for commercial art. The digital age had begun to produce incredible opportunities in the fields of illustration, animation, entertainment design, but fate had a very different plan for me. The first day when I walked into my first painting class, everything changed. I saw a library full of books and started flipping through them, and I saw these images. Rembrandt, Vermeer, Velázquez, Odd Nerdrum, Lucian Freud, and many more of the great masters. They etched themselves into my soul and basically made me forget about being a commercial artist. I wanted to paint. So for the next 3 years, I became obsessive about learning the craft, immersing myself in the academic training that I knew would be required if I wanted to be a great painter. And I thoroughly enjoyed the process. Late nights in the live model workshop, figure drawing and painting, color theory, anatomy, design, perspective. It was all intoxicating to me, and I had the good fortune to study with some of the best realist painters in Los Angeles at the time. F. Scott Hess, Steve Houston, Ray Turner, Richard Bunkall, David Limright, and many more. So what was it about painting that had completely captured my mind and soul? Why did I decide to forego the potential financial success and stability that comes with being a commercial artist for a chance at being a starving artist? Well, for me, it came down to one thing: the feeling I felt when I first looked at a Rembrandt painting. I would go to the Norton Simon Museum, just minutes away from my home in Pasadena, and spend hours standing in front of this self-portrait. Then I'd work my way through the Dutch landscapes and Spanish portraits, then onto the modern section where I'd stare at Cézannes and Manets and Daumier, and I would feel stuff. To put it simply, I wanted to become an artist that made beautiful things that could make people feel stuff. I'm sorry I don't have a better term than that, but that's what drove me then, and I think it still drives me. Of course, it was the formal qualities of these works that created these feelings in me. The compositions of Vermeer, the buttery impasto of Freud, the scumbling, struggling brushwork of Velázquez, and of course, the light. My favorite paintings always seemed to glow. It was as if the image magically appeared on the canvas. And in studying techniques, I learned that there was a real process to making these images appear light-filled. So I dove in and I did everything I could to learn these techniques and apply them to making my own work. After Art Center, I began to show my work in galleries with some success, not a lot. I did many paintings, sold a few. I dealt with a lot of frustration from galleries and rejection, but generally I felt like I was on the right path. It was not an easy process and certainly not financially lucrative. So because of that, I always had a side job. I worked at a frame shop, in a gallery, and I did commission portraits to pay the bills. Then in 2004, came the side job that introduced me to the material that would completely change the way I approach my work. This is the Judson Studios in Los Angeles, a 5-generation stained glass studio that has produced some of the most well-known stained glass windows in the country for the last 125 years. I was lucky enough to get a part-time job here back in 2004 and pretty much became obsessed with glass and glass painting. Glass had this ability to do the thing that I loved about oil painting, but it actually did it for real. So my work during my time at Judson moved forward along 2 separate paths. First was doing commission work. Very enjoyable experiences. I worked in many different styles for different types of buildings, working with clients to solve issues and problems that they had, to create imagery that I'd never thought I'd ever make, and to create beautiful and dramatic spaces. Secondly, I was making a big effort to learn how to paint on glass. I was really excited about what you can do with paint on this amazing transparent material. And so all the different techniques, the media, the enamels, I went to workshops, I worked with other glass painters and learned from some of the best in the country. I learned how to use the paint to control light and to create imagery through shading and line work. And I applied all of the skills that I worked so hard to hone as a painter to painting on glass. So bringing these techniques back to Judson served my goal of bringing excellent painting back into contemporary stained glass. And the quality and scale of our projects grew by leaps and bounds as a result. I also started making my own stained glass panels. I would stay late, work on weekends to try to figure out how to make it my own. Did some leaded work, some traditional stuff, and then some more contemporary and experimental work. I was constantly in pursuit of trying to merge stained glass and fine art. Needless to say, I was very, very happy and very fulfilled in my work at Judson. And just when I thought I'd settled into a clear path forward, this project comes along. This is a rendering for what was, in 2013, the proposed sanctuary for the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. At the heart of the space, rising 37 feet tall and 93 feet wide above the altar, was to be a single stained glass window, meant to be a sermon in glass, according to Senior Pastor Adam Hamilton. Now, there's a lot of information out there about this project, including a documentary that was produced by Justin Monroe. It's called HOLY FRIT, and it chronicles the 4-year journey to making this window in great detail. So I won't go into everything here, but I will give you the short version. To put it simply and bluntly, in mine and David Judson's desire, or maybe desperation, to win this job, I created a design that could not be done using traditional stained glass techniques. Why? Because in traditional stained glass, you paint the detail in black on colored glass. And every time you need to shift colors, you have to separate them with a lead line. And so if you look more closely at the design here that I did for Church of the Resurrection, you'll see that I've basically created an impressionist painting. Within each piece, there are many, many colors. Here's David and I in what we call our oh shit moment, with the design projected at actual size, realizing how difficult this would be to do in traditional stained glass. The thing about this project was that the window was in such a strangely unique position, right there in the front of the space, like a movie screen. Usually you go into a church and you see stained glass in vertical compositions on the sides of the building with architectural details in between. And the leaded glass basically serves as a transparent extension of this architecture. Well, with this window spanning nearly the entire width of the sanctuary, there was no connection at all to the architecture. So the design really needed to be contemporary and light. Our design was selected. We were given the commission to build this window. And so the first thing we did was to try and make samples using the limited options that stained glass has available for putting multiple colors together. This was acid etching, enameling, silver stain, and honestly, we got some decent results. It wasn't as rich and colorful as my design, but it was the only option. Now, remember when I mentioned luck being part of my journey? Well, it was on a day back in September of 2014, while we were in the middle of making our samples to show the church, that this image pops up on my Facebook feed. This was an ad for a fusing workshop with Narcissus Qualiata, teaching painterly effects in fused glass. Fused glass? I'd never even considered that an option. In fact, going back to our earlier question, if you'd have asked me in 2014 what comes to my mind when I hear the term fused glass, it likely would have been images like this. Again, I'm not downplaying this work. I'm just saying that it had no meaning to me, no connection to me as a painter, and therefore I never considered fusing an option for me and for this project. So when I saw this image and read that it was teaching how to create painterly effects in fused glass, I was puzzled and really intrigued. I'd never seen anything like it before. And truthfully, it looked a lot like certain areas of my design. This is Narcissus Qualiata, or NQ as we call him, or Maestro. Call him what you want. But I can unequivocally say that he is the most amazing artist I've ever known. Upon signing up for this workshop, I bought his book, which is called Narcissus Qualiata, Archetypes and Visions. If you don't have it, you should have it. It's incredible. When I opened it up, these were the images that I saw, and that completely blew my mind. There are not many things that I can say that can overstate the effect that knowing Narcissus has had on my life in the past 9 years. For starters, we are kindred spirits artistically. We both started out as painters, then went to stained glass. We like the same artists, we love glass, and we get excited and inspired by risk-taking. We couldn't be more different in terms of our upbringings and our personalities, but when it comes to what we find beautiful, we're pretty much in lockstep. So when I sat down with Narcissus on that first day of the fusing workshop, I briefly explained the project that Judson and I were working on, and I showed him my design. So he looked at it and we zoomed in on the face of Christ. He sat there and looked at it for a minute or two and zoomed in and out and back in and chuckled for a second. And then he looks at me and goes, "How the hell are you going to do this?" "That's why I'm here," I said. Then he went outside and took a puff. That's what Narcissus used to do when he needed to think. So that night we went out to dinner. We had a few drinks, watched football, we ate sliders. One thing led to another, and the rest is history. During the making of the window, Narcissus and I had an amazing opportunity. It was so big, there was so much square footage that we got to pretty much use all of his techniques in the window. And with the window being that size, his techniques weren't even enough, so we got to develop a bunch of new ones together. It was a blast. I was also incredibly fortunate to be introduced by Narcissus to Bullseye Glass Company. Our window is made up of 16,000 pounds of their glass. We were invited to spend some quality time in the research and education department with Ted Sawyer and the crew up in Portland. And they showed us all these amazing ways of working with the material and developing the early concepts for our process for the window. And got to meet Dan and Lonnie and Jim and Sam and Mary Kay, the whole team, and hear the amazing story of how Bullseye came to be. Most importantly, though, I learned that not only was fusing going to be the right technique to bring my design to life, but it was the only possible technique that could do it. Narcissus puts it perfectly. With stained glass, you were always hunting for the perfect piece of glass with just the right gradation or just the right streaks or color blends. In fusing, you can make the glass with all of these elements, suited to the exact needs you have. My mind was blown. Yes, it's true. The materials that Bullseye makes are flat and uniform. Not all of them, but the ones I use. Take, for instance, this sheet of 3mm Bullseye glass. There's no color movement in it. When you cut a shape, it always has a hard edge. Now take the same color and frit. When you pour it out of the jar, it is incredibly diffuse and uniform. Here are stringers and confetti. At first glance, it appears that this material cannot possibly produce painterly effects. But what Narcissus had discovered in his years of experimenting at the Bullseye factory was that indeed you could create painterly effects with Bullseye's glass. It was all about how you position the materials you were using. And then ultimately, how can you employ the elements of heat and gravity inside the kiln to create the final effect? Armed with this knowledge, the incredible support of Bullseye, and 3,400 square feet of glass to make, we set out on the 3-year fabrication process that ultimately yielded a window that we're all very proud of. So I wish I had more time in this talk to get into specifics about how all of these effects are created, but it would take weeks and months to get through all of it. The one thing I do want to get into, however, is the creation of the face of Christ, as it has a direct connection with the painterly portrait class that I've been teaching through Bullseye these last couple of years. One of the revelatory techniques I learned on day 1 of Narcissus workshop back in 2014, and it's still a huge part of my working process today, is the slider. Narcissus developed this technique, a relatively simple solution, to the problem he had of needing the glass to look more organic, to flow and transition. The need for material that he could somewhat control in terms of shapes and colors, but would also take advantage of the naturally organic and unpredictable flow that takes place inside of a kiln at 1500 degrees. To make a slider, a kiln shelf is placed at a low angle inside the chamber, and glass is strategically placed and piled, then allowed to flow downhill to create painterly movement. These were some of our sliders made during the resurrection window. These sliders were then used as sheet glass, cut up to create a detailed mosaic that would be fused together to form the final face. When this face came together and I saw it on the light table, it was like the first time I saw a Rembrandt. I felt stuff. I want to show you a few images now of the portraits I've done in the past few years using this exact same technique. Another very important development that took place during the making of the resurrection window was the idea of premade material. When looking at my crazy design with all of its colors and brushstrokes and sketchy marks and idiosyncratic craziness, Narcissus would be constantly frustrated, saying to himself, "This is insane. How are we going to do this?" And so at one point, he just started throwing glass into the kiln. Scraps, frit, stringers, you name it. We have to transform this material. He would look at an area of foliage and just make piles of different greens, or the galaxy in the sky, piles of blues, pinks, purples, channeling the character of each part of the design, and then fire the glass. It would come out melted and wild, organic, and very alive. And it was perfect because it was basically like we've now created brushstrokes that we're then going to place on our glass and build up more frit around them for the final firing. It was really an amazingly beautiful technique. This concept of pre-made material was essential to many areas of this window and is still an essential part of my working practice today. Now, I know you're probably asking yourself, looking at these images, Tim, I'm seeing a lot of images here that look like they have paint in them. On the glass, below the glass? Well, yes, you are correct. That is paint. It's the same exact paint I used for 15 years doing traditional stained glass work. So I want to rewind back to the first class I took with Narcissus in 2014. One of the big things that he told us was that a big aha moment for him when working with fused glass was that by combining the painterly fusing techniques with glass painting, you could add a completely new dimension to the work. The glass paint could be used in the same way as an oil painter would use a grisaille or black and white underpainting, upon which to glaze transparent color to create a magical combination. Keeping in mind that glass paint is really only meant to add line, shading, and texture and not color. As a traditional glass painter, I felt that the addition of the paint helped me to tiptoe my way into fusing. It allowed me to start the image making process in an area that I felt comfortable. Lines, shading, textures, splashing, stippling, the energy of painting I was very comfortable with. In my first experiences, I have to admit that paint was kind of a crutch for me and I probably applied it too heavily. Narcissus would always say, "Not so much paint, not so dark." And over time, during the project, I learned how to sort of dial it back and use it when I needed it, and use it to support and enhance the beauty of the glass, not to take over. Okay, so I've mentioned to you all of the components of the painterly image making process. But there still is that one final and most important element. It's the same one that drew me to the works of the old masters when I was a young painter. It's the element of light. When you make an image out of glass, the image is not on top of the glass, like oil on canvas. The image is the glass, and light is able to penetrate every single part of it. For centuries, artists have been trying to infuse light into paintings. With these techniques, we can do that. Our job as the artist is to harness the light through careful placement and fusing of all the elements at our disposal. Whether it's glass off the shelf, pre-made materials, we are in control to some degree until we finally put the piece in the kiln and let heat and gravity have the final say. Narcissus always says that the perfect painting is in glass. I have to agree with him. My goal as someone who has completely fallen in love with this technique is to help grow the community of artists who see the magic of it the way I do. It took me until 40 years old to discover this material. I often ask myself, what if I would have known about it while I was in art school? What I wouldn't give to have another 20 years under my belt of working with glass. I know I speak for Narcissus and Bullseye when I say that fused glass as an image-making material is in its infancy. There is still so much possibility in fields such as fine art, public art, and architectural art. Our goal is to expand this conversation through teaching, speaking, and the continual push forward with testing and experimentation in our own work. Wow, there's nothing like a good chat at a good, solid, sturdy lectern. Who doesn't like that? Anyway, thanks for listening. Looking forward to continuing the conversation and looking forward to speaking with you live. But this version of me is going back into that dark room to hide away for a little while. I don't know, what am I going to do in here? What does somebody do in a dark room like this?